morning. I am Dr. Anupma Srivastava from the Department of Economics, Isabella Thoburn College, Lucknow, and today I am going to talk on women's labor movement in the US, right? We start with this PowerPoint presentation, the labor movement with a special reference to the role of women in it. This is a famous quote by Alvin Toffler, which he gave in the book Future Shock. We have cut ourselves off from the old ways of thinking, of feeling, of adapting. We have set the stage for a completely new society and we are now racing towards it. But we must focus on the twin forces of acceleration and transience. We must learn how they alter the texture of existence and how and why they confront us for the first time with the explosive potential for the future shock. This is a picture which shows the garment workers strike banner in 1909. This strike happened and their view was, we are starving while we work. We might as well as starve while we strike. So they better thought that they should strike and get their rights rather than they should starve while they work. So they were, this shows that they were not satisfied with the work conditions, with the wages which they used to get at that time. In 1791, when Alexander Hamilton wrote his report on manufacturers seeking ways to develop industry in the US, he identified women and children as a source of cheap labor. Later, in the 1820s, in the textile mills of New England, most notably those in Lowell, Massachusetts hired young women from the surrounding firms as workers, viewing them as more traceable than men and more willing to earn less. To make matters worse for female laborers, working men often saw them as threats to their status, especially as new machines permitted less skilled operatives to perform tasks formerly assigned to craftsmen. Thus, it is not surprising that as men attempted to unionize in order to combat declining pay and status, their leaders often ignored female workers. So that shows the status of women at that time. Now we'll talk about a very important concept in the economy, what we call sexual division of labor. Some slave owners specified rules as to the sexual division of labor for their slave families. As we know that America had a slave economy, so what these slave owners felt for the slave families, this is clear from one of the statements given by the slave owner in Mississippi who was working on the plantation, and what he specified as the rules is specified by his owner. If you see, that shows the condition of the family at that time. Each family to live in their own house, the husband to provide firewood and see that they are all provided for and wait on his wife. The wife to cook and wash for the husband and her children and attend to the mending of clothes. Failure on either part, when proven, shall and must be corrected by words first, and if not reformed, to be corrected by the whip. So that shows the condition of women at that time. Women, however, were eager to participate in the fledgling labor movement. As early as the 1820s, female workers in Lowell engaged in turnouts or work stoppages when employers sought to cut workers' paychecks. In 1844, women from the mills formed themselves into Lowell Female Labor Reform Association. At a time when females seldom spoke in public, the women of Lowell, led by the intrepid Sarah Bagley, testified fearlessly before the Massachusetts legislature that new requirements forcing them to tend more machines at accelerated rates were endangering their physical well-being. Their petition drive compelled the legislature to investigate for the first time the question of women's health and safety. So that shows the success of Lowell Female Labor Reform Association prevalent at that time. When their petition was denied, the LFLRA forged an alliance with the New England Working Men's Association, which published the Voice of Industry. Through this medium, the two unions declared that in view of our condition, we toil for about 13 to 14 hours per day. What was the work condition? This shows that confined in unhealthy apartments, exposed to poisonous contagion of air, vegetable, animal, mineral property, debarred from proper physical exercise, mental discipline, and mastication cruelly limited, and thereby hastening us on prolonged pain, disease, and privation to a premature grave. Pray the legislature to institute a 10-hour working day in all the factories of steel. So this shows that how much toiling was done by these men and women, and what were the work conditions prevalent at that time, which led them to join the labor movement. After the Civil War, when around 6 lakh men died, it became necessary for the women to enter the workforce in increasing numbers. Some journalists and labor leaders called for the creation of a women's bureau to oversee conditions of female labor. Later on, Federal Department of Labor talked about a kind of organization. Even Afro-American women started to unionize. Newly freed black women in Mississippi formed a union and struck for higher wages as early as 1866. Married or single, these women participated in the paid labor force to a far greater extent than others. The Knights of Labor, which was again a labor organization, formed in 1869, was the first large-scale national labor federation in the US. In 1881, its members voted to admit women. So, in 1881, women got for the first time the right to join the unions. The organization grew significantly in the mid-1880s after a series of successful strikes. The Knights relied heavily on the organizing efforts of women, such as the beloved widow Mary Harris Jones, better known as Mother Jones. By the 1890s, the Knights of Labor, weakened by lost strikes, poor investments, and American battles with the newly formed American Federation of Labor, no longer carried much weight in the labor movement. Its early demise could not detract from the unprecedented role played by the Knights of Labor in the promotion of women in the workforce. The most successful union at the turn of the 20th century was the AFL. What does AFL stand for? American Federation of Labor. Unfortunately for women workers, Samuel Gompers shared society's belief that a woman's place was in the home. It was the union's stand that it's wrong to permit any of the female sex of our country to be forced to work, as we believe that men should be provided a fair wage in order to keep his female relatives from going to work. If women will be engaged in paid work, that was their psychology at that time. If women will be engaged in paid work, then the respect for them would diminish and they would bring forth weak children who are not educated to become strong and good citizens. Now women started recognizing the male counterparts resistance and oppression. So what they said, they formed an organization which was called Women's Trade Union League, founded in 1903. Initially, the Women's Trade Union League hoped to persuade male-dominated unions to take women workers more seriously. Female sewers in the shirtwaist factory, dismissed in 1909 for union activity, were joined by their upper class allies. The strike began in 1909, at which Gompers cautioned workers against a general strike. But Clara Lemlich, a young immigrant woman, stood and recited her hardships as a working girl, galvanizing the audience with her call for action. The impassioned crowd affirmed its solidarity by taking the old Jewish oath, "If I turn traitor to the cause, I now pledge, may this hand wither from the arm I now raise." This picture shows women being employed in the low paid jobs, but after the World War II, the situation became somewhat different. Now women started getting jobs in the high paid categories. Almost 7 million women entered the workforce, including 2 million in heavy industry. You can see the women operating the machines here. The profile of the female wage earner was changing as the percentage of married women in the workforce actually rose from more than 25%. The participation by the US in the World War II accelerated this change. 6 million new women joined the workforce. A popular song, Rosie the Riveter, and a Norman Rockwell painting of Rosie that was commissioned for the cover of the Saturday Evening Post were invaluable symbols to weapon and munitions manufacturers. When the war ended, that means the World War ended, many women had to give up their high paying jobs to make room for returning veterans. However, even though the entertainment and advertising industries portrayed the American wife and mother as totally devoted to domesticity, increasing number of women poured into the workforce, taking positions in office work, retail, teaching, nursing, and other so-called feminine occupations. This is another labor organization, National Organization for Women, which was founded by a group of feminists, including Betty Friedman. The largest women's rights group in US sought to end sexual discrimination, especially in the workplace, by means of legislative lobbying, litigation, and public demonstrations. And because of this National Organization of Women, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as you know, came into existence. These are some of the court rulings which led to a betterment of the position of women. In 68, EEOC ruled that sex segregated help wanted ads was illegal. This ruling was upheld in 1973 by the Supreme Court, opening the women to apply for high paying jobs, and they were free to do that. Then Shirley Chisholm became the first black woman elected to US Congress, and in 72 she ran for president also. Then in another case, the Supreme Court ruled that women meeting the physical requirements could work in many jobs that had previously been for men only. So this shows that there has been a change in the US employment opportunities for women in America because of these labor unions, the litigation, the labor, the laws were started being changed. In 1970, again there was a ruling which says that the jobs held by men and women need to be substantially equal but not identical to fall under the Protection of Equal Pay Act. An employer cannot, for example, change the job titles for women in order to pay them less, because that was one of the practices which these employers were doing. They were wanting to give less to women, so what they did, they changed the title of the women. Although women were doing maybe heavier jobs, but they were telling them that they are receptionists so that they could pay them less. On March 22, 1972, the Equal Rights Amendment was passed by Congress and sent to the states for ratification. Originally drafted by Alice Paul in 1923, the amendment, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied by the US or by any state on account of sex. Sally Preisen became the first woman ordained as a rabbi. Again in 1974, the US Supreme Court ruled that employers cannot justify women getting lower pay wage because that is what they traditionally received under the going market rate. A wage differential occurring simply because men would not work at the low rates paid women is unacceptable. On March 22, again there was a coalition of labor union women in Chicago elected Olga Madar as its first woman president. In 1978, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act banned employment discrimination against pregnant women. Under the act, a woman cannot be fired from the job or denied a promotion because she is or she may become pregnant, nor can she be forced to make a pregnancy leave if she is willing and able to work. Around 1 lakh women and men marched in support of Equal Rights Amendment in Washington, D.C. In 1981, Sandra Day Conner was the first woman appointed to the US Supreme Court. In 1992, again Carol Braun became the first African American woman to be elected to the US Senate. And in 2007, Arlene Holt Baker was named Executive Vice President by the AFL-CIO Executive Council, becoming the first Afro-American to be elected to one of the Federation's 3 highest offices. In 2008, Randy, Antonia and Loretto Johnson were elected to the top leadership position in the American Federation of Teachers. And it was for the first time that women hold the top post in AFT, whose membership is more than 70% female. This picture shows Leonora Riley, who was very active in pressing the women's rights. The work looks brighter now, but no one denies that women still face discrimination or that most female workers are still congregated in sex segregated jobs. Perhaps the charismatic Leonora Riley, who worked tirelessly in organizing women into labor unions at the beginning of the 20th century, gave the best advice for future progress. As is clear from this statement, women, real women, anywhere and everywhere are what we must nourish and cherish. In a world in which the workforce is becoming increasingly diverse in terms of race and ethnicity, it might be well to heed her wisdom. So that brings us to the end of this women's labor movement in US. I think you have got a clear picture of how the labor movement unions started being made in America, how women started taking a more and more active role in these trade unions, how they started recognizing about their rights, and there were certain women activists who helped them in recognizing their rights. And still the march is on, like still we can see that everywhere, like not only in India as you can identify, but everywhere in all the countries, women face somewhat that kind of discrimination in the labor market. But still we have come a long way. Through these unions, we have been able to achieve what we wanted. And certainly our household work done by women have started to be recognized in the census of America as well as India. So thank you so much. If any questions? Yeah.
I would like The rate of discrimination in giving the rights to women was more in the African American ladies or the Native Americans? Was there a difference that the rise of getting their rights was more in African American or the Native American ladies?
Actually, Native Americans were definitely had an advantage in getting their rights at a speedier process, because you know, when these unions want to have some kind of right through their voices, then certainly the Native Americans had a strong politics and had strong links. So automatically it, you know, it gives you an advantageous edge. But the thing is that this slavery and this blacks, so called blacks, what we call them, the movements were led by them only, because the slavery and these plantation workers were occupied by these number of workers only. Majority of them were blacks. So whenever these movements started, it translated the voices of the blacks only. So Native Americans were not, you know, that much affected by the labor policies and employers' operation as were blacks. So automatically the advantageous edge was the Native Americans.
Did men played any role in supporting the women's labor movement?
Definitely, like I told you just now, that there were some men's labor organizations, which Working Men's Association, like I told you, which joined hands with the Lowell Women's Labor Association. Only then women could achieve what they wanted to. But they were very few, like the labor unions who were dominated by men had very few sensitized men who could raise the voices of women along with them. Otherwise, it needs a kind of, you know, total transformation of the society. Only then all the men joining hands with the women and breaking this kind of, you know, discrimination, sexual discrimination or sexual division of labor, this total transformation needs to be done in the society. Anything else? Any other question? So thank you.